Thank you very much, Liam. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to AHDB Dairy for the opportunity to present to you. I've got some snippets from 4 of the studies that they funded as part of the outwintering package that we undertook at Harper. Before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge my co-authors, Paul Hargreaves and Dave Roberts, who are at SRUC in Dumfries, and also to acknowledge the contribution of this guy here, who's Norton Atkins. He was a research assistant with us at Harper Adams, and he was the guy who undertook a lot of the work, and if he had still been here, he would have been standing where I am now. He's since gone back to New Zealand. But to move on with the studies. So, 4 studies, and they are looking at aspects of outwintering of heifers. Outwintering is a low capital cost option for rearing dairy herd replacements. We know that cattle can cope well with cold conditions. They can adapt their behaviour, they can adapt their location to allow them to reduce their energy expenditure. In mature dairy cows, it has been shown that they have similar performance both during the dry period and through into subsequent lactation when they have been outwintered, as compared to herd mates that have been housed. However, the results that have come out of studies where heifers have been outwintered have been more variable in terms of the animal's performance. So, the aims of the studies, firstly, we wanted to have a look at what was happening in terms of current practice with outwintering systems for our dairy heifers. And then we wanted to move on to have a look at the suitability of these systems for spring calving herds, and then to look at whether we could incorporate this as a method of rearing our replacement heifers for high output intensive dairy systems. So the first study that we undertook was a survey of current practice. We sent this survey out to 120 farmers that we knew were outwintering heifers. 70 were returned, so we had a response rate of about 58%. Herd size, 368 cows. The majority were spring calving herds. They were most commonly rearing crossbred heifers that went on to yield 5,360 litres per cow per year. They had a replacement rate in the range of 20%, which meant that they were rearing about 70 heifers per year outwintered. Their major reasons for selecting outwintering and incorporating that into the system was to, number one, reduce the costs. They perceived that these animals that are outwintered had better health and welfare, and they were also using it as an option to release housing. 66% of the farms that we surveyed were expanding their herd size, so they were using the housing that was released from those heifers, replacement heifers, to house cattle, dairy cows from the herd. So what were they feeding? They were feeding as a forage crop, deferred grazing. That was the most popular option in terms of forage crops. Then kale and fodder beaters, the third option. And I've just highlight the fact that the data that I'm presenting here are for heifers that are over 1 year of age. We did also have some responses in terms of what they were doing with heifers that were less than 1 year. Incorporating into the feeding regime was a feed supplement, and the most common feed supplement was baled grass silage, and that was by far and away the most common feed supplement. We took that information and moved on to look at a more controlled study on 9 commercial dairy farms that outwintered dairy heifers. There were, of those 9, there were 3 that were outwintering heifers on deferred grazing, 3 that were outwintering them on kale, and 3 that were outwintering on fodder beet. On each of those farms, we took 40 focal heifers. We gave 20 of those heifers a mineral bolus, co-secure bolus, and the other 20 received no mineral supplementation. And those focal heifers ran with the rest of the farm's replacement heifer group. So normal standard management, except we were monitoring those animals. Looking at the growth performance of the animals. We've got here grass, kale, fodder beet, and looking at the daily live weight gain. Well, we were disappointed in those live weight gains. We went out onto farm and weighed those heifers at regular intervals. The kale animals performed the best. They grew at 0.4 kilos per day, but we had a poor performance in those animals that were on the deferred grazing and the fodder beet. Body condition score, each of the 3 treatment groups lost body condition over that outwintering period. And the other thing that I wanted to draw your attention to was the variability in terms of growth performance among the heifers on those farms. So we've got one of the farms that was outwintering heifers on deferred grazing, live weight loss of 0.2 kilos per day, and one of those that was outwintering on fodder beet, again a loss in body weight of approaching 0.1 kilos per day. The others, the heifers gained weight, but you can see that variability in terms of the growth performance. Moving then on to the controlled studies that we did on outwintered heifers for a high output system. Here, this study done at Harper Adams, we had 48 spring calving Holstein heifers, 3 treatment groups, 16 heifers outwintered on deferred grazing, 16 on fodder beet, and 16 that were housed. Housing period, the study period ran from November through to February, and they were housed 6 weeks pre-calving. This shows you their live weight change during that period. So these two are the fodder beet animals shown with the blue line, the housed animals shown with the yellow coloured line, and those animals, both groups, grew at just in excess of 1 kilo a day. The fodder beet animals, they took a little while to get used to their new feed source, and they did grow a little bit more slowly initially. If we put onto that the growth or the live weight for the grazed animals, they grew in similar sort of rates to the other 2 groups up until about 6 weeks, and then by the 8th week they'd started to lose in terms of weight gain. And at that point we did have a very wet winter that year, and those animals, they were we'd fenced them so they couldn't go back onto the grass that they'd grazed, and their growth did drop off through that 8th week. We introduced some concentrates here, and growth rates did then subsequently recover. In terms of body condition, housed animals, that bit fatter, those are the ones that gained condition through the that period of time over that winter. Fodder beet also gained condition, and they were about 2.6 body condition score points at the end of the study. The grazed animals, 2.4 in terms of their body condition, and their body condition score didn't change over the study period. Looking then at performance during the first lactation for fodder beet, grass, housed heifers, daily dry matter intakes, we're looking at about 18, 19 kilos per day. Milk at about 30 to 31 litres per day, kilos per day. Those that were offered the fodder beet during the outwintering period, and I should say that these are now on the same ration, running with our lactating dairy cows. So during that lactation period, yield a little bit lower in those animals that were on the fodder beet, and their milk composition was that little bit higher. Somatic cell count, respectable somatic cell counts, lowest in those animals that were outwintered on the deferred grazing. The animals that, interestingly enough, have had the highest dirt score through the outwintering period. Calving interval, no significant difference across the treatment groups. And then this is a study that was conducted at SRUC, mimicking what we had done at Harper Adams, but this time incorporating kale as the second outwintered treatment. In terms of performance over that outwintering period, dry matter intakes in the region of 7 to 8 kilos per day. No significant differences in terms of final live weight of those heifers or the daily live weight gain rate of those heifers, but they all, the kale group and the house group, did lose some body condition, not significantly different across those 3 treatments though. Through first lactation, similar sort of dry matter intakes to what we saw at Harper, 18 or so kilos of dry matter intake per day. Milk yield, the animals that have been outwintered on the deferred grazing, they had the highest milk yield. No significant differences in terms of milk constituents with this study. Also no significant difference in the somatic cell count, but those animals that were outwintered on kale did have the longer calving interval. We've put onto this some costs, and in terms of costs, we've taken into account the yield that we got from our forage crops. We've taken into account the cost of the baled silage that we offered them as a supplement, and we've taken into account the concentrate feed we put into them, our grazed heifers, a little bit of concentrate to help those ones along, and the concentrate feed for our housed animals. So if we look at feed costs, we're looking at a higher feed cost here for those animals that are housed as compared to those that are outwintered. Labour costs, in terms of the time that it's taking to work with those outwintered heifers, it takes that little bit longer with those animals than it does with those that are housed. Capital cost, we've incorporated into this things such as the fencing for the outwintering, and in here building and then muck storage cost associated with housing. If you look at that, of course, we've got a higher cost then for those that are housed. And in terms of total cost, approaching £300 per head in terms of a cost for housed heifers, and we're looking at that cost in the region of 143 for our animals on fodder beet and grass, £123 a head for those on the kale. So just quickly to conclude, farmers believe that outwintering reduces cost, and our calculations suggest that that is the case. They perceive that they are achieving good growth performance from their heifers, and they perceive that they are better in terms of their health and welfare. We would say from the studies that we've undertaken that yes, animals can reach target daily live weight gains, but their growth does need to be monitored. So it comes back to that story that we've heard a number of times over the last couple of days, that we need to measure so that we can monitor performance, and then if we have an issue, we need to be able to react to that problem. They need some sort of supplemental forage crop in order to support those daily live weight gains, and we need to have in place a contingency plan for poor weather or poor growth rates. In terms of cost savings, we're looking at a 45 to 50% saving in terms of feed cost, and our calculations suggest that we could be looking at a cost saving of greater than 90% in terms of fixed costs. That was nearly perfect, Liam.